Well, hello everybody. This is John and Ben. Welcome to our next Sweetspot Safari in the series. Today we're lucky to have Tracey McEachran, and she will be introducing herself in a minute. We're really looking forward to this topic. The topic is called Space and Things, and in fact we probably don't know how it's going to pan out, but hopefully we'll have a very sort of rich and varied journey as we go down. As always, the purpose of this call really is to try and look at differences and polarities and similarities and see there's an opportunity to maybe be a bit less polar in our thinking and challenge people's thinking, and hopefully getting people to work together in a bit more of a collaborative way, or at least think in a more collaborative way. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Tracey. So over to you.
Hi, so my name is Tracey McEachran, and I'm based down on the south coast, but I work all over the UK in leadership development and culture change. So my background is 20 years in commercial, working for a company called Cadbury's, which is now Cadbury Treble Bassett, working in senior marketing roles and senior sales roles. I did that for about 20 years, and then I decided to go and do something radically different and went off to study art. So I did a BA and an MA in photography, in fine art photography. What I didn't know, I thought I'd just come out, churn at the end of that degree and be a better photographer. But what it taught me about was culture, visual language, psychology, philosophy, sociology. So it comes much more, there was much more in there than I could ever have imagined. And so I came out of that master's and studied to be a coach. And during that time, found myself networking and working within the housing sector predominantly. So now I take all that commercial acumen, my creativity and my coaching, and work on leadership development and culture change predominantly within organizations that have a social impact.
Wonderful. So I'd forgotten, Ben, please say hi. I realized that we didn't get the opportunity to introduce you, because I know we know each other so well. So Ben.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Hi Tracey, and thanks John. And I think people probably are familiar with my face and me being a fellow sweet spot hunter. So I don't want to hog up the limelight here and go over old ground. So I'm just interested in hearing more about Tracey and her career. And I must admit, on the one hand, I'm really just really jealous of working for a chocolate company. So that was the first thing that sprung to mind with my slightly childish mentality. So yeah, 20 years in Cadbury. So what were some highlights? Just so you mentioned you're in branding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest highlight is a sense of being in a place where there was a lot of trust, and to be in a culture where it's deeply trusting and you're valued was probably the biggest takeout. When a culture is working well, how beautiful that is. But I suppose one of my early career, I can remember I was really good. Again, I was a salesperson. I started at the bottom, and I used to be at the top of the table for sales, winning all the competitions. I actually won a camera. And so that's what started my photography. But that's another story. One of my first competitions, I won a camera. Anyway, so I was working really hard. I was winning lots of things. And my team I was in, I really galvanized the team as well. I was a team player, and we'd won team of the year. And I must have gone to my boss and with frustration and expectation that I was going to be plucked out from being a salesperson to be asked, this is a role for you, Tracey, will you come and do this role? And she said to me, Tracey, no one's going to do that. You are the master of your destiny. You're the only person that can manage your career. You have to decide where you're going to go and how you're going to get there. And that was probably the best piece of advice I ever had. And it was mind-blowing for me, someone that takes initiative, because I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to wait for anyone to tell me what I'm going to do next. So that, I think, was a really, really big highlight.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah, and I think quite often it is just these little eureka moments, isn't it? It's just just a simple bit of information in the right space, in the right time, the right space, the right context, and it's almost like a kind of a domino of insights emerge from it, and it's hugely empowering. I mean, I'm kind of interested because we're here today talking about things and spaces, which I'm really intrigued about. And I must admit, it's been percolating in the back of my mind for a good week now. And on purpose, we haven't really kind of dug in or planned for this, as John alluded to it. But maybe just an introduction to this topic. What you actually mean by things and spaces. I know they sound quite intuitive, but perhaps if you could paint a picture of what they mean to you, and also why you'd like to talk about them with us today.
I think when John said about the title of the session, who the hell is going to know what this is about? So here we go. So I'm going to read the verse from the Way that, for me, makes sense of things and places or spaces. So it's a favorite verse of mine. When I was studying photography, it was something I gravitated towards, and I've used it, in talks, and I use it all the time when I'm talking to people about leadership. So the Way is a Taoist like prayer. It's a way of being, and they were and the Taoists or Taoists were around harmony and harmony with nature. So it's verse 11. Let me just get that up on here. 30 spokes joined at one hub. Emptiness, it's the emptiness that makes the cart useful. Cast clay into a pot. The emptiness inside makes it useful. Cut doors and windows to make a room. Emptiness makes the room useful. Thus, being is beneficial, but usefulness comes from the void.
Wow, that's really powerful. And just before, I'm going to apologise. It was my phone. I'll hold my hand up that went off there. So following on that, it's really intriguing. So I'm going to try and ask you probably maybe an esoteric question here, Tracey, but I think that's the flavour of what we're doing today. Is, can we actually, listening again to that poem, can we actually effectively define a thing in a space? And really a follow-on question is, do we need to?
So my response, and way I've heard that question, John, so I might not have heard your question correctly, but my response is, as a trainer, as a facilitator, I am totally responsible for the container. I am totally responsible for the framework. And I put my focus in building that and creating that in a way that's flexible. So when I turn up to a group, the objectives for all of us is really clear, and I just hold the shape. And that shape may change because the needs of the group change, but I focus totally on that and let the group have the space to focus on the outcomes that they seek. I cannot force what comes out. I can only pay attention to building the container.
So that makes a lot of sense. And being in the coaching world, I totally understand that, and that sort of triggers the sort of second question a bit in terms of, do we really need it? But I know, Ben, you wanted to come in there. So
yeah, well, I think without wanting to answer for Tracey. I think that sounds really important to me, and somebody with a brain that works perhaps a little bit, I wouldn't say abnormally, but not quite normally. I think having the right amount of structure is really important, because actually just having no form, having no structure, having no framework, that kind of almost like anything is possible, and that's the kind of barrier to kind of problem solving, to coming together for reaching objectives, as you say. So that kind of makes a lot of sense. But it's interesting, because the way you talk about container, it's not a physical container, so it's not a room, is it? So I'm just trying to think of the features of what you mean by this container. I don't know if you can kind of help me just picture it in my mind.
I suppose, yeah.
Is it kind of cognitive? I'm just trying to think. Are they kind of almost like mental models, which we all kind of understand, and it helps organize our thoughts?
So if you have a ritual, would be a container.
Yeah.
And that is a psychological, it takes you to a psychological space. So if we come into this room together and we always say a prayer, that is a container. And so your mind is, there's no surprises, you're contained, you're held psychologically. I suppose that's it, a psychological holding. And yeah.
Do you think the world would be a better place if more people understood this? Because I think this is it's a very interesting and very powerful concept for the people who understand it. But I just really wonder how widely it's known, and whether this could be a huge opportunity, Tracey.
I think we search for it. I think we need it. So what happens is we end up, it's almost like building a house, and someone's got some bricks and someone's got a bit of wood and someone's got some, but you end up with this misshapen thing that doesn't actually create what everybody needs, in a way. So because we're all trying to do that, I think naturally we want it, so we do try and create it. So we have habits, that's a ritual. So we create things around ourselves in a non-knowing way. So I think that's right, John. I think if we do it more in a deliberate, knowing way and contracted way, then coming back to your point, Ben, about neurodiversity or any diversity, if it's contracted and we all agree, and it's in this psychological thing becomes visible because it's spoken, then that's helpful.
And yeah, the kind of rituals, you seem to be pointing towards something which I think is quite important. And I read a really interesting book by a Korean philosopher called The Disappearance of Ritual, and I can't remember their name, but it really struck me how important ritual has been for humans, for our entire history, and whether we like it or just being without having any judgment about religion, one of religion's key features seemed to be ritual, bringing people together around a common story. There was some sort of communal thing which we did, and when we turned to become a secular society, we lost a lot of these rituals or containers which brought diverse people together. And that I don't know if you're am I onto something there? Does that seem about right?
100%. Yeah. And so wasn't it the communist, isn't it called the religion, the opium, was it Marx that called opium of the masses? Because there is a need for wanting structure and ritual, and honestly, each of us, if we just think about our day and what do we call habits, what have we got, what are our little rituals, and they will be things now like checking your phone before you do something, or having a cup of coffee in the morning. What rituals have you built into your day, or what, and you might call them habits. And so when I'm working, is how do you take that and enrich it and honor it.
Mm.
So when you do come in the room together and you have a meeting, that you go, okay, we're gonna all get a drink, sit down together and just drink and have 2 minutes just to sit and drink.
Mm.
And that's a ritual. You just created a ritual. But what it does is bring people together into that container.
So that becomes almost automatic, doesn't it? To your point about habits. So if you do this repetitively, there's almost this lack of newness or kind of surprise that actually it becomes automatic, and so then you find you end up doing this shared habit without thinking about it. And I guess that's probably the goal, as long as the habits are useful and healthy.
No, so I would say no, pay attention. So I would say don't make it so it goes into autopilot.
Okay.
You just honor it as what it is. I think there's not enough honoring of things. So that's the same as the morning cup of coffee. We just say it's a habit. Whereas if we say it's a ritual and we honor it, then it gives us that, it gives status to it and gives it the meaning that it really has.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful clarification.
Yeah, sorry. There's an interesting perspective here, a nuance, because when you talk about autopilot, that means to me something that's done for the sake of it, rather than something that's rich and appreciated. And yet there's a possible paradox here, or maybe it's just a misunderstanding, is that if you look at top performing sports people, they talk about muscle memory. They talk about ingraining things into habits and rituals that they do to a point where they don't have to focus on them anymore. It just happens. It's almost becomes like a way of being, you know. And I know in my low-level racing career, that's what a lot of the tuition I used to go is the really good performing race drivers is they know how to respond, they know how to react immediately, instinctively and intuitively. So I'm just wondering if there is a difference here between things that we do instinctively that are right, correct, and things that we do because we believe we have to do them, or there's a social norm, for instance, that makes us do those. Does that make sense, Tracey?
I think so. I was thinking that I've drifted into my time of playing tennis and badminton, and my rituals before I served. So I would go through a set way of serving, and I would go through a set way about how I bounce the ball, and when I love it watching rugby players take their kicks and the patterns and the rituals, because they're just preparing their mind. So I wonder if it's ever, I know muscle memory is very different. You can see as you've got a drum kit there. So you're trying to, when I'm learning things, that's muscle memory. So that's then I hit flow. There is a certain moment where you go, but that's not autopilot. Flow is not autopilot. It's a completely different mind state. And so flow is brilliant. And in flow, you have no sense of time. Everything goes. And it's the most beautiful thing. And that's when muscle memory comes in. But that's not autopilot.
No, it's quite interesting. I remember, again, through some of my early NLP training, one of the exercises they did with us was they asked us the question, are you in time or are you through time? And obviously the connection there is through time is more around flow. Tends to be more, that was interesting with your Taoist program, tends to be flow more associated with Eastern cultures. They just let things happen and things will find their natural end point, start point, or whatever, and they don't worry too much about it. Whereas people who tend to be in more Western cultures are very time bound, in terms of the meeting will start then, it will finish then, and all sorts of other examples. And I do quite a bit of work in the Middle East now, and it's quite interesting that they are definitely more in flow and stuff. And it is very powerful. And the learning for me was, and I remember asking, again, paradigms that we put ourselves in. I assumed because of the work I do, I was very much through time, because I was doing works that was very regimented, very structured. And in fact, when I gave the criteria to my wife when I came home after doing the course, I said, am I an in-time person or a through-time person? She said, John, you are the most in-time person that I've ever seen. You live for the moment. And then I started to reflect back. and look at back my career and the things, but also things I enjoyed doing, like skiing, racing, and all the bits and bobs and stuff. So I guess my point there is just that, as well, is it one of these things that we don't always instinctively know, and it's only when we start to meet other people or like-minded people or be challenged or have the discussions that, you know, I'm just looking for an opportunity, if that makes sense, Tracy. You know, looking at the work that you do is to open this sort of thinking to other people.
I mean, because what you're talking about is perceptions there, isn't it? You know, you've had a perception of something that's an internal perception about something, and someone, you've asked someone else to hold a mirror up, and they've told you you're very different to what you think you are. So that's what I thought I heard from what you're questioning, is around how do we hold up so we can really look at what our perceptions are and question our perceptions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. And is it, and the follow-on question, which we was going to answer later, but it's relevant now, is that by holding the process of the mirror up, does that, you know, raise our own self-awareness? I'm trying to, again, look for these positives. I think, you know, I've been through a lot of change as have other people, which have been really, really powerful. But I'm wondering how many other people out there, right, are stuck in their own paradigms. And I know, Ben, as well, that's some of your experience too, in terms of some of the people that you work with through your work in charities and everything else too.
Oh, definitely. I was in an Uber, and the guy was studying maths. And so one of my things is that everyone is creative. There's no, it's like, you know, saying I'm not creative is saying I'm not rational. It's the same as saying I'm not rational or I'm not logical. It's just a madness to me. Of course you are. And so this chap, he said, well, I'm doing maths. He said, but I'm not at all creative. And I said, how can you be doing maths then? You just couldn't.
Yeah, fair question.
It's great. I love the point about how, you know, asking yourself the question about being rational or being creative, because that's so true. Sounds to me as though that guy had gone through a similar paradox that I've been through.
Exactly. So he'd got a perception of in his mind. We had a half an hour journey. I asked him how could he possibly do maths, and talk to me about when he had to bring in how, you know, he's thinking and looking at, you know, problem solving, and is there only one way to solve a problem, and so within half an hour he was like, oh no, I'm really creative. And because no one had questioned, he'd been carrying around this thought, this perception. And, you know, that, so and again, you said at the beginning, I think maybe in our conversation before, about your daughter drawing. So you said, I'm not very creative, not like my daughter that draws all the time. And so we have this, and honestly, if you went to art classes, drawing classes, you may not be, you know, natural, but I'm sure that your daughter started drawing when she was young, got some praise or enjoyed it and carried on drawing. And so, yes, she's really good at it because she's done a lot of it. And so if you go, everybody can learn to write. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I think that's, so there's creativity and there's a craft. And the craft is drawing. Creativity is much, much broader than that. So, but we go through the sausage machine of school, who says that if you can't paint or draw, then you don't go to art classes. You're not good at art, and therefore you're not creative. It's this linear thinking, and because what a nonsense! What a complete nonsense.
Yeah.
So, but yes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Go ahead. I think that's spot on, and yeah, I don't think we talk about education quite a bit through these, so we probably won't spend too long talking about the lack of merit of compulsory education. But I'm kind of interested also. I kind of get the ritual, the container, the framework, the kind of psychological piece. What about the things? So when we talk about the kind of the things and what comes out of that dynamic with the container, what do you mean? Because I automatically think about objects, but actually, how would you describe it?
Objects, ideas, clarity is a thing. Unity.
Action, decisions, those types of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm also a theory U practitioner. So, and that's a system thinking, and it takes you through this U. The first part, because the U is this shape, because generally people want to go from problem to solution. If you sit in a room and you say, we've got a problem, everyone wants to solve it before you've even discussed what the problem is. So the container is the U. You start by aligning, okay, what is the problem? What really is the problem from everybody's point of view? Let's define the problem so we all agree it. We co-sense, then you go into co-sensing. So we take all the wisdom. What wisdom do we need to understand this problem fully from every point of view? And then you go into a thing called presencing, which is stop, have a cup of tea. I mean, you could do this over a year. So presencing is letting everything go and really sit in emptiness to allow the unconscious to surface. And then you go into co-creating and co-evolving. And so that first part of the U is quite slow. You can gather, stop, pause, and then you move really fast. But the whole thing is meaningless unless you move up the U, unless you co-create, co-evolve, and come out with solutions. We need solutions. So it's active. There has to be an action. But you have to leave space for curiosity. So the first bit is the curiosity, for openness, and letting the wisdom surface, all the wisdom, because 20% of what you know is in this knowing, in this conscious. You have got this wealth of knowledge and wisdom that is not at a conscious level that you need to give space to. And then we need to act. We always need to act.
That was fascinating, because very interesting what you were saying about the process, because of the danger of shortcuts. And this is one of our common themes throughout these safaris, is around the lack of critical thinking. And having spoken to a number of people recently who are both in the science, arts and engineering, there seems to be a momentum now about the lack of critical thinking, partly driven by what I would call the like share culture and social media, which is something, again, Ben and I have talked about at length. People trying to shortcut for speed and not actually getting, by first of all working out the why, why we're all here, really understanding the process and where we need to go, and the depth that we really need to go to. And I know personally, I think Ben has said the same thing. It's a lot of people are switching off mainstream media, for instance, at the moment, and a lot of other social media. And I seem to find myself every day questioning, not just myself, but why are people really getting to the real solutions? Every time you see somebody respond or answer something, it just feels that we've got into this culture of looking for shortcuts. And if you agree, Tracey, what I mean, how do you think society can move forward in this area? And that's probably quite a deep question, I know.
That's a really big question. So when we're stressed, we start operating in primary ways. So in Jungian psychology, that would be from shadow. And when we are driven from fear, we act in primary ways, which is reactive, not responsive. And so I guess, we've talked about awareness. The biggest thing you can teach any leader is to live in awareness, is to be able to be aware of where your awareness is, where your attention is. But also when I'm working with people, so anyone can do this, is I say that if something feels really important, now if there's a fire, it is really important to get out of the building. There's no question, don't have to think about that. But if you're in your life and you think your field of view narrows to this, and you go, this is really important, she must do that, this must happen, I must move this thing here. When it feels like it's an absolute, really vitally important thing to do, you're probably in fear. And when you're in a good place, you always can stay nuanced. You'll never be primary. So you can say it would be really good to do this. It will have this impact, but it's not like critical life and death. Hardly anything is, apart from if there's a fire or a leak or what. So it's just about, and what happens is if you tune into your body, you'll know the throat tightens or your stomach and not. It becomes really compelling and important. And what I say to people there, from teaching people in leadership, is get in your helicopter for a second. Just get in the helicopter or move your body. Have you done meta mirror? You just literally get out of your seat, step 2 steps away from your seat, look back and go, how important is this? And so you shift perspective. So I think if more people could learn to press that, someone said to me in my coaching supervision, learn to press the pause button of life.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just thinking, I was speaking to somebody out in the Middle East the other week about absolutely hitting the pause button, because they become totally tunnel visioned around a whole, which by definition means no nuance and context. I like your word primary. I'd never heard that expression before. But also, I think, some of the work that I do is I spend a lot of time getting people out of the fear zone and working on things that they value, because what you find, and the evidence is really, really strong, is when people value things, they will make a change. When they fear things, there will be just a short-term reaction, and it certainly won't be sustainable. So I think this whole idea of awareness, stepping out, as you say, looking from the helicopter and all these things is really powerful. And it's probably more prevalent now than it has been for a long time, because of the sort of hidden stresses. We've always had stress in the world, haven't we? But it feels to me, and I don't know what your views have been, is that there feels to be a lot more hidden stress, that the sort of stresses that people aren't talking about. And it's not just related to wars and COVID and stuff like that. I think it has been a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of the way that we work and the way we interact, which is causing all sorts of probably latent problems for the future as well. So really opportunistic.
I think we're genetically very similar to when we were hunter-gatherers, when we were, most of our time was spent, in very different contexts to now. So, our nervous system, the way that we function, we respond to seeing a lion in the same way we respond to somebody not liking a post, but rather than, we don't see hundreds and thousands of lions every day. So we're getting constant activation, I think, of our nervous system, and it's very difficult for our primary functions of our brain and nervous system to really differentiate between, is it a real significant threat versus a kind of minor threat. And so it relies a hell of a lot on the cognitive side of us to basically step in and slow things down. So that comes back to habits as well. So we can actually build habits to build these defense mechanisms. But I think you mentioned attention, which is a real important thing to me, living with ADHD, attention deficit disorder. Well, attention, I think, is going to be one of these huge things in society that we come to discuss and kind of value differently, because Google and Facebook are built on our attention, and I think where we pay attention, how we pay attention, and who gets to decide where we pay attention, I think is really important for society in the future, because everything is downstream from our attention. So I think you, to me, you kind of hit the nail on the head, that actually that maybe that's a really important place to start.
Yeah, true. I often start sessions with a quote from David Whyte, the fantastic poet David Whyte, and it is beauty is harvested in presence. And I just write that up and say, okay, what does that mean for us today? if people are on their phones, if they're thinking about a problem.
It seems it's a really powerful, simple few words, which is cut through to what's important and what's here right now.
And so if we go back to what motivates me in the terms of feeling that happiness, contentment is wasted and talent is wasted, for me, that if we're not present, then actually we're always wasting opportunities, or it feels like there's some waste of the possible. What's possible for us when we come together if we're distracted.
And I just wonder whether, going back to the verse which you read out at the beginning of the interview, there seems to be like different lenses which cultures look through. And you mentioned the Tao and the Way being very much about harmony. And so that's the kind of the interaction of different parts. I remember reading a paper not so long ago about the study between Japanese and US citizens, and they were both asked to look at the same picture. The US citizens picked out objects as an undersea seascape, and invariably the US citizens pointed to fish, to kind of rocks, to objects, to things, and the Japanese invariably pointed to the context. So how everything, kind of the overall kind of image and how things kind of related, and so they described a setting, almost like a kind of container, I guess, is what I'm trying to link it back to. And I just wonder also, probably there's a connection there with presence. We seem to be very much thinking about the future. We're kind of we're either ruminating about the past, or we're kind of anxious about something which hasn't happened. And I just wonder actually whether a lot of what's going on with your work is really kind of trying to bring the best of both kind of ways of looking at the world, looking through culture, and integrating them in the workplace. I don't know if any of that speaks to you.
I suppose what speaks to me is that, going back to what John said about holding the mirror up. So if you're in one group of people that are looking at the world through one lens or have one perspective, you sort of notice what your perspective is, and also in there, could there be another? And so no matter whether they're looking at the whole piece or whether they're looking at objects, you're encouraging them to look from another perspective. So I suppose that is true. I have to say, you keep bringing things up for me. There's I think it was called The Little Book of Tea by a Japanese chap, and I can't remember the name. It was written in the 1900s, I think, Victorian era anyway. And it's all about the Japanese tea ceremony. And it was about him visiting England and seeing the difference in the culture. It's it's a tiny book, and it's so beautiful. And so I did a piece of work, a photography project on the tea ceremony. And that, again, so it's ritual.
Really,
but I'm pretty sure that they build the most important part of the house. This is what I learned from that study then, was the tea room, which they would spend a lot of money on building these tea rooms, but they always disintegrated. They would disintegrate and have to be replaced because they would age like nature. So there was a natural order in it.
It's really interesting both you and Ben, because I'd like to come back slightly to the example you came up with, Ben, with this, the Japanese seeing the context, right, rather than the fish and the rocks. Because I like building connections, because when I build connections, I help people learn. I learn as well. So I think what you've just described there, partially, there's an analogy there between what we touched on earlier, was between in time and through time. So again, the people who were looking for the rocks and the fish were very much through time. They were looking at the sort of objects rather than the space, which is the context and the nuance, which was the more sort of the in time, feeling what was going on, maybe the water lapping around. And the reason I say that, apart from building connection, is that people do learn in different ways. You know, you've got ADHD, you know, we know people who've got spectrum disorders. And one of the interesting things for dyspraxia, which I learned indirectly because my son's got dyspraxia, is that there are certain people, they have to see the whole picture before they can do something. So the analogy is that for people who are doing jigsaws, you know, the idea, and this hit me like a train when I found out, is that the idea of giving somebody a whole jumbled up of pieces and getting them to do the jigsaw by building up the straight edges and building out might work for some people, but it's absolute nightmare for others. They have to see the whole picture in the end game before they can start to build it. And I think this is where these sort of concepts, thinking about, you know, holding the container, you know, getting people's attention, you know, the reflectiveness that you've talked about is so powerful, because I think because people learn in different ways, it's going to help a lot more towards inclusivity and recognizing that people learn in different ways, which means, of course, we'll get way more richer contributions in the end. So I don't know, you know, any experiences on that sort of thing, and, you know, given the diverse of people that you work with, Tracey?
Well, I suppose it's also having that space right at the beginning of a session to ask people what they came here to get, what they came here for themselves, and what they need in order to walk away with it. So it's really simple start. And it's quite interesting because, how many people turn up to a meeting and not know why they're there? So if you just start with that bit, why do you think you're here? And what do you need today in order to go away with what you wanted to achieve? I think that usually giving people a couple of minutes and space just to think about those things and then share with the group, that helps sort of, again, build a contract. So it's articulated what's needed for each person. I think,
how little time we spend that in reality in the corporate world, which is, you know, it's unbelievable. You know, people will walk into a room and somebody will already be showing the agenda, you know, on a screen, and then people will go straight into transaction rather than asking the question, you know, of the why, as you say, which is important from the individual level, but it's also important from the collective level as well, because that, you know, builds that sort of group bonding and thinking and everything else. And again, it's funny, I was doing an exercise last week, and it is a bit about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And we live in this culture now, maybe a time-bound culture, certainly in the West, which is very driven by schedule and time, which is very much through time. And we don't spend enough time just reflecting and being potentially more effective by working on the right things. you know, remember the days of time managers in the 80s and 90s, you know, when people were flogging, you know, filofaxes and time managers, you know, and they teach us about the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And of course, you know, intellectually, it makes sense. And I think most people, you know, when they're told it, can understand it intellectually. You know, people are smart, but the difference is doing, isn't it? And I think that the point you make about having that ritual at the start of, you know, not you know, it doesn't have to be a coaching session or a leadership session. It could be just a meeting.
Any meeting. That's what I say to people. If you turn up to a meeting and you don't know why you're there, that's just not acceptable, really. It's like, you need to know why you're there, what they need from you, and what you need. It's just that's just a meeting. But so that whole thing, I also run vision sessions and sort of helping boards create purpose, vision, mission, and values. And I work with art, so I work with art, and I can do. I was you know, recently with the boards, did that whole piece in a day. So we walked away at the end of the day with a real written purpose, vision, mission, and values. And so one of the board members obviously worked for a big company and said, "Oh my gosh, we've just gone through days of trying to get this stuff, and you've done it in a day." And it's because I took art, took art in, and I took other things in that got to a deeper place much quicker. And so when I'm working with people, they know sort of the framework, but they're going, I don't know where you're going with this. This feels really wide, but we trust you, so we're going with it. And then they are just completely astounded by how everything just forms. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's just so on point, what was come out of that. And we just didn't see it coming, because what I do is send them in that co-sensing phase that's really wide, probably wider than they thought they were going to go.
So is that in part, is that letting go of control in just like a simple way? It's actually just allowing the intelligence of the group. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And allowing the unconscious to surface. So I do work where I get different groups to draw different scenarios, or I get them to build a montage, a collage. And then I'll get another group to interpret, they'll interpret each other's work. And so in doing that, you get another layer of meaning that comes out. And so they'll say, well, we weren't even thinking that, but now you said it, you can see that was exactly, yeah. So you get this richness by letting the unconscious come, working at speed, letting the unconscious come up. And of course, you know, if you ask people to draw, everyone's on at the same level pretty much. So you haven't got a dominant voice in that.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So what I'm really interested in, I know we're coming nearer the end of today's session. It's been really, really rich, because we, you know, as we said, you know, we're always trying to find sweet spots, right? We're trying to see if there's a, you know, and I'm having listened to you today, you know, the really rich discussions, I'm really wondering whether there is a boundary between space and things, and does it really matter if there's a, you know, but what I'm really interested in, I think it would help sort of our listeners as well, is that, you know, you've described so beautifully and eloquently how this plays out in meetings and sessions and groups and stuff. How do you think this is going to play out in society? And I know it may not be an easy question to answer here and now, but I think it's really important for us, because what we try and do is link, you know, what we do, you know, what we talk about in the day-to-day space, you know, in terms of development to wider issues, wider societal issues, you know, if that makes sense, Tracey.
It makes so much sense. I mean, yeah, I'm involved in all sorts of groups, some really beautiful groups where there's a richness of connection and collaboration. But then I'm also, you know, aware of the fragmentation of our society and that polarization and the lack of focus. So for the wider group, for me, it's about how we build more communities, that are able to build some safety so people can come out of that stress behavior. I mean, online is with us, but how we can teach young people from a very young age that about, you know, how the manipulation and how they are how to read social media. You know, we teach them how to read a book, how to read social media, I think is important. And for me, I'm going to just keep saying community, find community. If we can build, you know, put more youth clubs back, build more community opportunities for people to build community is the way forward, I think. I work with all sorts of organizations, and where there's a sense of community and connectedness, the organization 1 and 1 equals 3, 4. The job, I think, is for when I work with bigger organizations, how they create community within the bigger organizations. So 1 and 1 still equals 4, which is I think quite challenging, but it's possible.
So it's a really powerful statement. What I'm just hearing, if I'm going to walk away from today with one word in my head, is community, because the way you've described it there, and again, it's something I know that also Ben's very passionate about, is community at every level, you know, whether it be in your local village, whether it be in a team, whether it be in a sports club, whether it be in corporations, whether it be in political organizations, is that, you know, if communities can be built at every level, then we've got a chance. And maybe that's one of the words that is missing in terms of real truth about community and resonance. I know people talk about it, you know, but, you know, separating the buzzword community that sometimes our politicians say, and the reality of creating a community. And I think that's maybe possibly one of the sweet spots. And again, we won't answer it today, but maybe leave it out there, is this creation of a community. And, you know, as coaches, we use the word co-creation, and you've used it a number of times today when you're describing the use sense is, and I think that's it, co-creating communities, you know, maybe one of the answers, you know. Ben.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. I think what I'm thinking is that you know, through nobody's fault, we've become, you know, particularly in the West, quite individualistic. You know, where we're focused on the self, you know, and I think we've got so far, and actually now is the time to rebuild community, and you know, find rituals that bind us together, and so I totally hear that, and I think that you know, maybe a knock-on effect of being individualistic is to, you know, solely focus on objects, but actually maybe that's, and so we need to go back to actually sorting out the kind of ritual, the community, the container, to actually give context to those objects, because at the moment they're decontextualized, they're kind of, yeah, I think that was how I thought about your summary. And I think that another one which is important, which I hadn't really thought of, is the you know, what you're trying to do with these containers and your work is build a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious. And so actually, you know, awareness and attention, you know, is a kind of conscious act, but of course we can't pay attention to everything, and you know, the unconscious is this huge you know, this huge beast within all of us, and actually building a bridge between both of those within these containers and objects, I think, is also really powerful.
Beautiful.
Great. What a great place to end on. So before we finish, Tracey, any final words from yourself?
Oh, I think so. I'm going to give you one technique that I have for anyone out there that wants to move into community, and that's whenever I'm getting frustrated, or I'm feeling like I'm shutting down, or I'm nervous if I'm presenting in front of a large audience, then I picture my heart as a water lily and opening up with the sun. And that visualization just takes me into a completely different place. Yeah,
that's really powerful. That's a wonderful sort of aide-memoire for people to sort of remember. So again,
I'll give it a try as well, definitely.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes, that's now etched in my my conscious, as well as hopefully in my subconscious too as well. So I really like to thank you there, Tracey, for being our guest explorer today. This has been a really sort of wonderful and insightful discussion, and taking us into all sorts of different places and spaces and everything else. So for the listeners, we'll be coming back soon again with another Sweet Spots of Safari. So hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends, because we want to try and build a community, which is a highly relevant word today, of people who actually want to collaborate more, you know, want to get away from levels of polarity and try and understand how they can contribute in a better way. So thank you for listening, everybody, and we will catch you soon.
Take care. Bye.